Hi, let's do it. So let's read a little bit. That's my night reading. Can fix this to cut my hair. Okay. So let's continue reading Meditations on First Philosophy. I just begun and then decided to do this live stream. Why not? So I'm just in the beginning actually. Um, just reading the preface. So let's continue. Now that I have once for all recognized and acknowledged the opinions of men, I at once began to treat of God and the human soul, at the same time to treat of the whole of the first philosophy, without however expecting any praise from the vulgar and without the hope that my book will have many readers. On the contrary, I should never advise any one to read it excepting those who desire to meditate seriously with me, and who can detach their minds from affairs of sense, and deliver themselves entirely from every sort of prejudice. I know too well that such men exist in a very small number, but for those who, without caring to comprehend the order and connections of my reasonings, form their criticisms on detached portions arbitrarily selected, as is the custom with many, this I say, will not obtain much profit from reading this treatise, and although they are perhaps in several parts find occasions of cavilling, they can for all their pains make no objection which is urgent or deserving of reply. And inasmuch as I make no promise to others to satisfy them at once, and as I do not presume so much on my own powers as to believe myself capable of foreseeing all that can cause difficulty to any one, I shall first of all set forth in these meditations the very considerations by which I persuade myself that I have reached a certain and evident knowledge of the truth, in order to see if, by the same reasons which persuaded me, I can also persuade others, and after that I shall reply to the objections which have been made to me by persons of genius and learning, to whom I have sent my meditations for examination, before submitting them to the press, for they have made so many objections in these so different, that I venture to promise that it will be difficult for anyone to bring to mind criticisms of any consequence which have not been already touched upon. This is why I beg those who read these meditations to form no judgment upon them unless they have given themselves the trouble to read all the objections as well as the replies which I have made to them. Hmm. So, synopsis of the six following meditations. In the first meditation, I set forth the reasons for which we may, generally speaking, doubt about all things, and especially about material things, at least so long as we have no other foundations for the sciences than those which we have hitherto possessed. But although the utility of doubt, which is so general, does not at first appear, it is at the same time very great inasmuch as it delivers us from every kind of prejudice, and sets out for us a very simple way by which the mind may detach itself from the senses. And finally, it makes it possible for us ever to doubt those things which we have once discovered to be true. In the second meditation, mind, which making use of the liberty which pertains to it, takes for granted that all those things of whose existence it has the least doubt are non existent, recognizes that it is, however, absolutely impossible that it does not itself exist. This point is likewise of the greatest moment, inasmuch as by this means a distinction is easily drawn between the things which pertain to mind, that is to say, to the intellectual nature, and those which pertain to body. But because it may be that some expect from me in this place a statement of the reasons establishing the immortality of the soul, I feel that I should here make known to them that having aimed at writing nothing in all these treatises of which I do not possess very exact demonstrations, I am obliged to follow a similar order that made use of the geometers, which is to begin by putting forward as premises all those things upon which the proposition that we seek depends, before coming to any conclusion regarding it. Now, the first and principal matter which is requisite for thoroughly understanding the immortality of the soul is to form the clearest possible conception of it, and one which will be entirely distinct from all the conceptions which we may have of body. And in this meditation, this has been done. In addition to this, it is requisite that we may be assured that all the things which we conceive clearly and distinctly are true in the very way in which we think them. And this could not be proved previously to the fourth meditation. Further, we must have a distinct conception of corporeal nature, which is given partly in the second and partly in the fifth and sixth meditations. And finally, we should conclude from all this that those things which we conceive clearly and distinctly as being the very substances, as we regard mind and body to be, are really substances essentially distinct one from the other. And this is the conclusion of the sixth meditation. This is further confirmed in the same meditation by the fact that we cannot conceive of body excepting in so far as it is divisible, while the mind cannot be conceived of excepting as indivisible, for we are not able to conceive of the half of mind as we can do of the smallest of all bodies. So that we see that not only are their natures different, but even in some respects contrary to one another. I have not, however, dealt further with this matter in this treatise, both because what I have said is sufficient to show clearly enough that extinction of the mind does not follow from the corruption of the body, and also to give men the hope of another life after death, as also because the premises from which the immortality of the soul may be deduced depend on an elucidation of a complete system of physics, This would mean to establish in the first place that all substances generally, that is to say, all things which cannot exist without being created by God, are in their nature incorruptible, and that they can never cease to exist unless God, in denying to them his concurrence, reduce them to naught. And secondly, that body, regarded generally, is a substance, which is the reason why it also cannot perish, but that the human body, inasmuch as it differs from other bodies, is composed only of a certain configuration of members and of other similar accidents, while the human mind is not similarly composed of any accidents, but is a pure substance, is a pure substance. For although all the accidents of mind be changed, although, for instance, it thinks certain things, will other perceive others, etc. Despite all this, it does not emerge from these changes another mind. The human body, on the other hand, becomes a different thing from the sole fact that the figure or form of any of its portions is found to be changed. From this, it follows that the human body may indeed easily enough perish, but the mind or soul of man, I make no distinction between them, is only through its nature immortal. In the third meditation, it seems to me that I have explained it at sufficient length the principal argument of which I make use in order to prove the existence of God, but no one the less, because I did not wish in that place to make use of any comparisons derived from corporeal things, so as to withdraw as much as I could the minds of readers from the senses. There may perhaps have remained many obscurities, which, however, will, I hope, be entirely removed by the replies which I have made to objections which have been set before me. Amongst others, there is, for example, this one: how the idea in us of a being supremely perfect possesses so much objective reality that it to say participates in the representation in so many degrees of being and perfection, that it necessarily proceeds from a cause which is absolutely perfect. This is illustrated in these replies by the comparison of a very perfect machine, the idea of which is found in the mind of some workman, for as the objective contrivance of this idea must have some cause, in example, either the science of the workman or that of some other firm whom he has received the idea. It is similarly impossible that the idea of God which is in us should not have God himself as its cause. In the fourth meditation, it is shown that all these things which we very clearly and distinctly perceive as true are true, and at the same time it is explained in what the nature of error or falsity consists. This must of necessity be known both for the confirmation of the preceding truths and for the better comprehension of those that follow. But it must meanwhile be remarked that I do not in any way dare treat of sin, that is to say, of the error which is committed in the pursuit of good and evil, but only of that which arises in the deciding between the true and the false. And I do not intend to speak of matters pertaining to the faith or the conduct of life, but only of those which concern speculative truths, and which may be known by the sole aid of the light of nature. In the fifth meditation, corporeal nature generally is explained, and in addition to this, the existence of God is demonstrated by a new proof in which there may possibly be certain difficulties, and also, but the solution of these will be seen in the replies to the objections. And further, I show in what sense it is true to say that the certainty of geometrical demonstrations is itself dependent on the knowledge of God. Finally, in the sixth, I distinguish the action of the understanding from that of the imagination. The marks by which this distinction is made are described. I here show that the mind of man is really distinct from the body, and at the same time that the two are so closely joined together that they form, so to speak, a single thing. All the errors which proceed from the senses are then surveyed, while the means of avoiding them are demonstrated, and finally, all the reasons from which we may deduce the existence of material things are set forth. Not that I judge them to be very useful in establishing that which they prove, to wit, that there is in truth a word, that man possesses bodies, and other such things which never have been doubted by any one of sense, but because in considering this closely, we come to see that they are neither so strong nor so evident as those arguments which lead us to the knowledge of our mind and of God, so that this last must be the moment certain and most evident facts which can fall within the recognized sense of the human mind. And this is the whole matter that I have tried to prove in these meditations, for which reason I here omit to speak of many other questions which I dealt incidentally in this discussion. So the book is divided. I have read the prefatory note, the letter, the preface to the reader, and the synopsis of the six following meditations. And now comes meditation one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Meditation 1, of the things which may be brought within the sphere of the doubtful. Meditation 2, of the nature of the human mind, in that it is more easily known than the body. Meditation 3, of God, that He exists. Meditation 4, of the true and the false. Meditation 5, of the sense of material things, and again, of God, that He exists. Meditation 6, of the existence of material things and the real distinction between the soul and body of man. Really? That's it. So maybe let's read the first meditation. Meditations on the first philosophy, in which the existence of God and the distinction between mind and body are demonstrated. Meditation 1, of the things which may be brought within the sphere of the doubtful. It is now some years since I detected how many were the false beliefs that I had from my earliest youth admitted as true, and how doubtful was everything I had since constructed on this basis. And from the time I was convinced that I must once for all seriously undertake to rid myself of all the opinions which I had formerly accepted, and commence to build anew from the foundation, if I wanted to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences. But as this enterprise appeared to be a very great one, I waited until I had attained an age so mature that I could not hope that at any later date I should be better fitted to execute my design. This reason caused me to delay so long that I should feel that I was doing wrong were I to occupy in deliberation the time that yet remains to me for action. Today, then, since it very opportunely for the plan I have in view, I have delivered my mind from every care, and am happily agitated by no passions, and since I have procured for myself an assured leisure, in a peaceable retirement, I shall at least seriously and freely address myself to general upheaval of all my former opinions. Now, for the subject, it is not necessary that I should show that all of these are false. I shall perhaps never arrive at this end. But inasmuch as reason already persuades me that I ought no less carefully to withhold my assent from matters which are not entirely certain and indubitable than from those which appear to me manifestly to be false. If I am able to find in each one some reason to doubt, this will suffice to justify my rejecting the whole, and for that end it will not be requisite that I should examine each in particular, which would be an endless undertaking, for owing to the fact that the destruction of the foundations of necessity brings with it the downfall of the rest of the edifice. I shall only in the first place attack those principles upon which all my former opinions rested. All that up to the present time I have accepted as most true and certain I have learned either from the senses or through the senses, but it sometimes proved to me that these senses are deceptive, and it is wiser not to trust entirely to anything by which we have once been deceived. But it may be that although the senses sometimes deceive us concerning things which are hardly perceptible, or very far away. There are yet many others to be met with as to which we cannot reasonably have any doubt, although we recognize them by their means. For example, there is the fact that I am here, seated by the fire, attired in a dressing gown, having this paper in my hands and other similar matters. And how could I deny that these hands and this body are mine? Were it not perhaps that I compare myself to certain persons devoid of sense, whose cerebella are so troubled and clouded by the violent vapors of black bile, that they constantly assure us that they think they are kings. Then they are really quite poor, or that they are clothed in purple when they are really without covering, or who imagine that they have an earthenware head, or are nothing but pumpkins, or are made of glass, but they are mad. And I should not be any the less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. At the same time, I must remember that I am a man, and that consequently I am in the habit of sleeping, and in my dreams representing to myself the same things, or sometimes even less probable things, than to those who are insane in their waking moments. How often has it happened to me that in the night I dreamt that I thought I found myself in this particular place, that I was dressed and seated near the fire, whilst in reality I was lying undressed in bed. At this moment, it does indeed seem to me that it is with eyes awake that I'm looking at this paper, that this head which I move is not asleep, that is deliberately and set of purpose, and that I extend my hand and perceive it. What happens in sleep does not appear so clear nor so distinct as does all this, but in thinking over this, I remind myself that on many occasions I have in sleep been deceived by similar illusions, and in dwelling carefully on this reflection, I see so manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep, that I'm lost in astonishment. And my astonishment is such that it is almost capable of persuading me that I now dream. Now let us assume that we are asleep, and that all these particulars example grantees that we open our eyes, shake our head, extend our hands, and so on are but false delusions, and let us reflect that possibly neither our hands nor our whole body are such as they appear to us to be. At the same time, we must at least confess that the things which are represented to us in sleep are like painted representations which can only have been formed as the counterparts of something real and true, and then this way those general things, at least example, eyes, a head, hands, and a whole body are not imaginary things, but things really existent. For, as a matter of fact, painters, even when they study with the greatest skill to represent sirens and satyrs by forms, the most strange, extraordinary, cannot give them natures which are entirely new, but merely make a certain medley of the members of different animals, or if their imagination is extravagant enough to invent something so novel that nothing similar has ever before been seen, and that then their work represents a thing purely fictitious and absolutely false. It is certain all the same that the colors of which this is composed are necessarily real, and for the same reason not all these general things, to wit a body, eyes, a head, hands, and such like, may be imaginary. We are bound at the same time to confess that there are at least some other objects, yet more simple and more universal, which are real and true, and of these just in the same way as with certain real colors. All these images of things which dwell in our thoughts, whether true and real or false and fantastic, are formed. To such a class of things pertains corporeal nature in general, and its extension, the figure of extended things, their quantity or magnitude and number, and as also the place in which they are, the time which measures their duration, and so on. That is possibly why our reasoning is not unjust when we conclude from this that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other sciences which have as their end the consideration of composite things are very dubious and uncertain, but that arithmetic, geometry, and other sciences of that kind, which only treat of things that are very simple, very general, without taking great trouble to ascertain whether they are actually existent or not, contain some measures of certainty and an element of the undubitable, for whether I'm awake or asleep, two and three together always form five, and the square can never have more than four sides, and it does not seem possible that truth so clear and apparent can be suspected of any falsity or absurdity. Nevertheless, I have long had fixed in my mind the belief that an all powerful God existed by whom I have been created, such as I am. But how do I know that He has not brought it to pass? There is no earth, no heaven, no extended body, no magnitude, no place, and that nevertheless I possess the perceptions of all these things, and that they seem to me to exist just exactly as I now see them. And besides, as I sometimes imagine that others deceive themselves in the things which they think they know best, how do I know that I am not deceived every time that I had two and three, or count the size of a square, or judge of things yet simpler, or if anything simpler can be imagined, but possibly God has not desired that I should be thus deceived, for he said to be supremely good. If, however, it is contrary to his goodness to have made me such that I constantly deceive myself, it would also appear to be contrary to his goodness to permit me to be sometimes deceived, and nevertheless I cannot doubt that he does permit this. There may be indeed be those who would prefer to deny the existence of God so powerful, a God so powerful rather than believe that all other things are uncertain. But let us not oppose them for the present, and grant that all is here said of a God is a fable. Nevertheless, in whatever way they suppose that I have arrived at the state of being that I have reached, whether they attribute it to fate or to accident, or make out that is by a continual succession of antecedents, or by some other method, since to err and deceive oneself is a defect. It is clear that the greater will be probably of my being so imperfect as to deceive myself ever, as is the author to whom they assign my origin, the less powerful. To these reasons I have certainly nothing to reply, but at the end I feel constrained to confess that there is nothing in all that I formerly believed to be true, of which I cannot in some measure doubt, and that not merely through want of thought or through levity, but for reasons which are very powerful and maturely considered, so that henceforth I ought not the less carefully to refrain from giving credence to these opinions than to that which is manifestly false. If I desire to arrive at any certainty in the sciences, but it is not sufficient to have made these remarks. We must also be careful to keep them in mind, for these ancient and commonly held opinions still revert frequently to my mind, long a familiar custom having given them the right to occupy my mind against my inclination and rendered them almost masters of my belief. Nor will I ever lose the habit of deferring to them or of placing my confidence in them, so long as I consider them as they really are, in example, opinions in some measure doubtful, as I have just shown, and at the same time highly probable, so that there is much more reason to believe in than to deny them. That is why I consider that I shall not be acting amiss if thinking of set purpose a contrary belief. I allow myself to be deceived and for a certain time pretend that all these opinions are entirely false, imaginary, until at last, having thus balanced my former prejudices with my latter, so that they cannot divert my opinions more to one side than to the other. My judgment will no longer be dominated by bad usage or turned away from the right knowledge of the truth. For I am assured that there can be neither peril nor error in discourse, and that I cannot at present yield too much to distrust, since I am not considering the question of action, but only of knowledge. I shall then support not that God who is supremely good and the foundation of truth, but some evil genius not less powerful than deceitful, has employed his whole energies in deceiving me. I shall consider that the heavens, the earth, colors, figures, sounds, and all other external things are not but the illusions and dreams of which this genius has availed himself in order to lay traps for my credulity. I shall consider myself as having no hands, no eyes, no flesh, no blood, nor any senses, yet falsely believing myself to possess all these things. I shall remain obstinately attached to this idea, and if by this means it is not in my power to arrive at the knowledge of any truth, I may at least do what is in my power. Example, suspend my judgment, and with firm purpose avoid giving credence to any false thing or being imposed upon by this arch deceiver. However powerful and deceptive he may be, but this task is laborious one, and insensibly a certain lassitude leads me into the course of my ordinary life. And just as a captive who is asleep enjoys an imaginary liberty, when he begins to suspect that his liberty is but a dream, fears to awaken and conspires with these agreeable illusions that the deception may be prolonged, so insensible of my own accord, I fall back into my former opinions and I dread awakening from this slumber. Last, the laborious wakefulness which would follow the tranquility of this repose should have to be spent not in daylight, but in the excessive darkness of the difficulties which have just been discussed. Okay, so I think that's it for today. Now let's continue working. Yep, just marking the book. So that's it for today. I think I have read this book when I was a teenager, but I don't really remember anymore. So I decided to read it again because I saw it for sale in a bookshop yesterday. So why not? Yep, reading it again. And that's it. Now, I don't know how. Oh, okay. Just end the stream here in front of me. That's it. Good night, guys. And that's it. This is for my baby. In the future, he's gonna see these videos. I hope so. Yeah.